Hi everyone, my name is Anna Radulovski, co-founder and CEO at WomenTech Network. Our today's guest is Khalil Smith, Vice President Inclusion, Diversity and Engagement at Akamai Technologies. And today we are going to cover the topics like setting up and growing your employee resource group, inclusive hiring practices, flexible work, employee benefits, and more. Hi Khalil and welcome.
Hi, Anna. When you say it like that, all these things we're going to cover, I'm like, how are we going to squeeze it all into this space? But I think the beauty of it is so many of these things are connected to one another that it really becomes about being intentional about the pieces that create the puzzle. So I'm excited for the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Our pleasure. So maybe we'll start with you sharing more about yourself, your DI journey, and how did you join Akamai?
Yeah, for sure. So, I tend to start with kind of the place that I spent the biggest chunk of my career, which was Apple. So Apple Computers that a lot of people know, or Apple Inc. now. I was there from about 2002 to 2016. And over that time, about 7 years of that time was really focused in the training and development part of the business, working on retail, which was about 60,000 employees, about 450 stores. And, that I would argue was kind of the start of my journey around diversity and inclusion and equity and fairness and culture. Because to me, in a lot of ways, diversity and inclusion are about just good leadership. I think there's a lot of value in separating that out and talking about what do we mean. But I've said for a long time, I think it's really difficult to be a good leader if you can only lead people that are like you, or people that have come from your same type of background, or people that believe the same things that you believe. And so working at a place like Apple, from right after the launch of the iPod to right after the launch of the Apple Watch, we saw a huge amount of change and a huge amount of kind of flexibility. And who are we? And what does this mean as we open stores in Shanghai and Brazil and Canada and the United States? And, how do you preserve the things that are very unique to you as an organization, yet also recognize that local nuance and local flavor is incredibly important? And I think those are questions so many multinational companies struggle with, right? How do you find the things that bring us together while also respecting the things that are different and unique and differentiated about us? So after 14 years, I decided the time is about right to move on from Apple, and did my own consulting for a period of time, working with some small businesses in the North Carolina area, and then moved over to a place called the Neuro Leadership Institute, which was at the time about 150, 200 person consultancy that was very focused on the intersection of kind of social psychology and behavioral economics and kind of how we do what we do, the neuroscience of how we operate, and business. So things like growth mindset at Microsoft, or diversity and inclusion at BlackRock, really fitting those things, because so much of what we try to do is best practices and dogma and things that we've seen before. But in a lot of ways, the operating premise at Neuro Leadership Institute was, if we were doing all the things that we should be doing, we wouldn't still have the same problems that we have, right? So how about if we take a step back and really think about how we fit together, who we are, why we make some of the decisions that we do, and then build a better process around that by building better systems. So I was there for about 3 years. I led parts of our research practice and our diversity and inclusion, culture and leadership, and performance management. And as a part of that, as a consultant, I worked with Akamai. And so had this wonderful opportunity to get to know the gentleman who's my current boss, Anthony Williams, who was in a role very similar to mine. And when he got promoted, he started looking for how he was going to craft this new inclusion, diversity, and engagement role. And after a bit of conversation and some interviews and a lot of other back and forth that we can talk about if we choose to, I was fortunate enough to be offered the role. And I've been at Akamai a little bit over 2 years now, leading, as you said, our inclusion, our diversity, our employee experience, and also with the profound pleasure of being the president of our Akamai Foundation, which is our philanthropic arm. So that's me in like 3 or 4 minutes. Hopefully that wasn't too much, but it absolutely, all of that informs the way that I think about this work and honestly, just kind of my career.
Yeah, we're interesting. And you mentioned about Anthony. So do you know how the process of the DI started at Akamai and what changed after you joined?
Yeah, so if we rewind back probably about 8 or 9 years, there was a gentleman who was the chief HR officer at Akamai, a gentleman by the name of Jim Gemmell. And Jim was a staunch advocate for diversity and inclusion in the employee experience. And after about 2 years of doing that work, kind of on his own with other folks in the organization, brought Anthony in. And Anthony is a storied HR professional, has a ton of expertise and experience, and really built up our inclusion, diversity, and engagement practices at Akamai. So things like launching our employee resource groups, launching a program that was really well received and has been the subject of a Harvard Business School case study called the Akamai Technical Academy, launching things like our Akamai Foundation. So all of these various pieces that had been kind of pulled together, and folks were maybe volunteering in certain places. Anthony really put a lot of structure and rigor behind those. And Anthony at the time was overseeing diversity and inclusion and talent acquisition. So when Jim decided to retire and Anthony got promoted, Anthony started crafting a new role. So he kind of broke out talent acquisition, and there's a wonderful gentleman by the name of Deji who leads that. And I was starting to partner with Anthony in my consulting role to say, well, what might this job look like as you bring someone in now? And that was right around kind of the summer of 2020, which most folks in the HR world know was right around the time of the murder of George Floyd. And so Akamai was absolutely positioned in a lot of ways differently than a lot of other companies because they had been having these conversations around diversity and inclusion, representation, and the employee experience for years. But still, that was a moment of kind of recognition for a number of us. And so as I was partnering with Anthony, really started to talk about, okay, it used to be diversity and inclusion. What does it mean for it to be inclusion and diversity? We didn't necessarily have engagement as a part of that. So what does that mean to add engagement to it? And those are really the ways in which the role has changed, is in expanding the team, adding more resources, adding budget, adding headcount, and really being focused on the intersection of what does it mean to have an inclusive and diverse team? Because, inclusion is wonderful, obviously making people feel connected, making them feel belonging. Diversity and representation in terms of making sure we're bringing in underrepresented talent and making sure that we're bringing the best of various folks. And yet you can have incredibly inclusive and incredibly diverse teams that aren't motivated to see the organization be successful. I don't know about you, Anna, but I've been on teams where I was like, I love the people I work with, but I'm not so sure about the company, right? Or I'm not so sure about the thing that we're supposed to be accomplishing. And so bringing all of those together to say, I trust and respect the people I work with, and I know that they trust and respect me, and we're incredibly motivated about the thing that is in front of us, the thing that we want to achieve. That for me is kind of going from potential energy, right? Almost like drawing back the bow, the kind of string on a bow, and then pointing it and letting it go and really unleashing all of this incredible talent. We're fortunate. We've got almost 10,000 people all across the world. And our purpose, which we've really clearly articulated, is to make life better for billions of people, billions of times a day. Most people haven't heard of Akamai, but you've probably experienced it. So if you use the internet on a semi-regular basis, we on any given day are running 30 to 40% of the internet's traffic. We're securing major institutions from cyber threats. We are, an emerging force in the cloud computing space. And so the scale of what we do is incredibly valuable, making sure that our employees can focus on what's in front of them because they know that all of these other things have been taken care of, is the difference between a safe and secure internet and one that has holes and vulnerabilities. And I know which one of those internets I want to be on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Something that I find very fascinating and interesting about Akamai is that at Akamai, you believe, to quote you, the future is flexible. So what percentage of your employees have the opportunity to work from home? I know flexibility is an issue at many companies, and why Akamai invested so much in flexibility for its employees and how this has paid off so far.
Yeah, so we have, towards the beginning of the pandemic, right around probably a month or two before I joined, there were already conversations happening around what is this going to look like? Where is this going? And so that was kind of in the October, September range of 2020. The senior leaders and a lot of our educated folks were having discussions around what is going to happen when and if the pandemic subsides and we're able to return. And there was really a recognition that our people are incredibly talented. We're doing great work, in this remote space. We've always had a certain population that has had to go into the offices because we work on sensitive government contracts or because we have particular equipment that folks need to be in for. But at this point, over 95% of our employees worldwide have the option to do their work remotely. And on any given day, about 89 to 90 something percent of people take advantage of that. So we've had a handful of people that have decided to return. We've got obviously our critical infrastructure folks that need to go into the office. But for us, so much of this was that it opens up a whole demographic that was not available to us before. And so, we have headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Krakow, Poland, and Costa Rica, and Bangalore, India. But we know that talent is not distributed only in those locations. And we also know that some people, and I've raised my hand, when Anthony first came and said, hey, we'd love for you to apply, he said this role of Vice President of Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement is based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I, at the time, was living and currently do still live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. My wife had a business in the area. My eldest son was going to a local university, Duke University. My youngest son really enjoyed school down here. And I said, we're not willing to move. We love it here. And as Akamai continued to kind of evolve and think about where this role might be, they said, you know what? We think it can be done remotely. And I would argue, I think I've done a pretty okay job in the role. Others may feel differently, but I think that has less to do with me being remote and more with all my other, failures. But in so many ways, we've heard employees say, I've gotten back my commute time. I've gotten time with my family. I'm more comfortable in my space. We see all the research from various institutions that show that certain demographics, specifically underrepresented or traditionally, historically marginalized groups, maybe didn't want to go back in. We see research that shows people with disabilities have been able to really create the environment around them that is conducive to their work. People that may have light sensitivities or noise sensitivities have really been able to create the right environment for them. And yet we still recognize that for some folks, maybe you do live in a somewhat crowded place, or you might have a young child in another room and say, it's not enough for me to just close the door. I do want to go to an office. I do want to connect with others. So we've really tried to find that balance of maintaining space that people can go to when they feel like the time is right, and yet never making people feel like there's an obligation to go back in. But if you want to, the space is here, and we're happy to have you in our offices.
I really love that. I love the opportunity that you are given a choice. No one is forcing you. So you decide what works best for you. And it feels great. I mean, I personally really love working remotely, and I don't have to go somewhere if I don't have to go, or don't want to go. So this is, I think that this is the future. And the more companies will embrace this, the more likely their employees will be more happy at work.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Anna, we talk a lot about trying to be a catalyst for change in the industry. And so as a catalyst, I absolutely agree with you. I hope that more companies recognize that employees can be trusted and should be trusted and can do their work from anywhere. As an Akamai employee, I hope the companies still keep not getting it, because we continue to get great, talented people that say, my boss said I needed to go back into the office. I don't want to. I'm incredibly productive from home. I've built up for over the past 2 years all of these ways of working. And now my manager is saying I have to go back because they want to go back. And so, one of the things that we did that I thought was incredibly future focused was that we were also quite deliberate. And when I say we, I'm talking about our senior leaders and the folks that really organized what we call Flex Base, which is this flexible work program, being deliberate about making decisions at the job level. And so there's also a big difference when we make those decisions at the manager level. And so you, Anna, maybe feel very comfortable managing your employees remotely and feel like you have a high degree of trust and say, no, if you're on my team, you can work remotely, no big deal. If I feel differently and the organization has put that power in our hands, then I'm now creating a condition where I say, well, if you're going to work on my team, you need to come into the office. Guess what happens is that people want to move to your team, or people on my team want to leave the organization. We start to create this bias and this inconsistency in the way that the company operates. And so for us to say, well, listen, if you are a systems engineer, it doesn't matter if you report to Anna or to Khalil. We believe that that role can be done remotely. Therefore, Khalil, you need to level up as a leader and as a people leader and as a manager, and we'll give you the resources and the tools to be able to do that. But you don't get to decide that because I liked it 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, I'm going to make everybody kind of go backwards. I do struggle so much with this idea that so many of the organizations and institutions we're talking about are always talking about the future. They're always talking about disrupting things and breaking things. But when it comes to the world of work, we say, no, 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 we've got to go back to how it was before, right? Like we're gonna have self-driving cars and the fastest internet you can imagine, and we're going to put people on Mars, and we're going to do all these things that seem like science fiction. But when it comes to the workplace, we need to do what we did when Henry Ford was making cars, however long ago. It's an odd approach. And I hope that more leaders are like you and see that we've got really talented people that are capable of doing this work. And the things that we're struggling with right now in terms of creating connection, or people really feeling, the serendipity of bumping into somebody in an elevator or going out to lunch with someone, we've just got to figure out, how do we do those things differently? How do we bake that into the nature of our work versus saying the only way to do that is to go in? Because you and I both work with people that are all over the world. And so if our operating premise is that I can only trust people when I see them every day, what does that mean for a multinational global company? That you don't trust anyone that you weren't seeing every day? I don't think that's what we're saying. I think it's just easier to say, let's go back to what we were doing before, because I knew what that was. This is a new frontier, and the boldest companies are going to be the ones that go forward, and employees want to work for those bold companies.
That's so true. I believe so too. And, in the past 2 years, you've also implemented a handful of employee benefits, such as subsidized wellness days, childcare benefits. So which of these have brought Akamai most notable employee satisfaction? And have you seen a direct link between the provision of these perks and employee productivity?
Yeah, I would say wellness days have been an absolute game changer for Akamai. So to describe them, wellness days are basically like company holidays that are not holidays across the world. And so there's 7 additional days that we've added in 2020, 2021, and 2022, and are in discussions around whether we'll continue those into 2023. Ironically enough, this past Friday was a wellness day. And so essentially what happens is virtually the vast majority of the company is off for that day. And the real benefit there, Anna, is that the difference between, and again, you and I and everyone listening knows there are times that I take a day off, but everyone is still emailing, conference calls are still happening, meetings are still going on. So you feel like you're missing out. Now, think about the times where the company shuts down around the holidays and everyone is off and it's just quiet. Right? You feel like I don't need to check my email, or maybe I can get a little bit ahead, or I can go do things and not worry about everything else that's going on and what I need to come back to. And so having those wellness days peppered throughout the year, they always make a 3-day weekend. They are, universal across the organization, and they are incredibly well received. To your point around a direct connection to efficiency or effectiveness or some of that, we haven't quite measured it yet, but I would put money on the fact that it is absolutely beneficial. So we know new employees, prospective employees that are about to get hired are incredibly thrilled with it. It's one of the things we hear about very regularly in what we call our pulse surveys. So my team runs a quarterly survey that we put out to about 50% of our employees each time, where we ask a series of questions around what's going well, how included do you feel, how do you feel about the future of the organization? And that allows us to really keep track of kind of how folks are feeling about things throughout the year. And we always hear positive feedback about wellness days. Really, the only negative that ever comes up is that the same thing that comes up when you have a holiday, which is, all right, well, we took 5 days worth of work and maybe put it into 4 days. So I had to work a little bit harder, but still people say, but I love the extra time off. I love having a 4-day week. It allows me to truly disconnect. So we've seen tremendous benefits and lots of positive feedback.
That's great. Sounds great. My recent post was also on 4-day week on LinkedIn and caused lots of discussion, around that. Well, of course, different companies have different policies around that. But thanks for sharing the way you do it. I think there's lots things to learn from you. And I want also to talk about hiring, hiring practices. You've implemented a number of changes to make your hiring process more inclusive. You've improved your job description, making it easier to understand and apply for. You also introduced more diverse interview panels. You also developed several emerging talent programs. Which of these great initiatives has been the most awaited for, and which has brought to you the most prominent results?
Yeah, so again, a huge shout out to our talent acquisition team led by Deji Mobagunde. He is they've done such incredible work. And I think to your point, a bit of what we were talking about at the very beginning of our time, which is all of these things start to weave and fit together. And so when we think about creating more inclusive job descriptions, that is some work that we've done with an internal program we call Role Mapper, which is really clear around what are the fewest kind of criteria that we can put around this role so that we're opening our aperture and getting as many talented applicants as possible. And so what that does is it reduces the barrier where, we know there's lots of research that shows that some women won't apply for roles if they feel like they don't meet all of their criteria. So the more you say, well, you must have this and you must have this and you must have that, and then you really start to interrogate those things and you say, well, we're saying that you must have learned this, but then we're also saying we're going to teach you this thing that is actually the exact opposite of that. So why do we feel like people need that thing? What is it that we're really looking for? So whether that is, more consistent interview processes, to your point around making sure that our panels of interviewers is more diverse and that we have gender and ethnic representation so that people can see what it's going to be like to work here. Whether that's making sure that the panels of people that we're interviewing are representative of our employees and our clients and the kind of global population as a whole. All of these things have really fit together to make sure that we're going out and finding the best talent. And one of the things that is very much in my space, so again, so much of this is we've got incredible teams that take the work that we do around understanding diversity, understanding inclusion, and weave it into what they do. I talk to so many of my peers in this space, and unless they're in the room advocating for diversity and inclusion, those things don't happen. We're incredibly lucky because we get to kind of think forward and think future because we've got people that are saying, well, how do we make our interview process more inclusive? How do we make sure that we're bringing in more representation and more diversity? And at the times that we maybe get stuck or have a question, we'll bring in Khalil and his team, but it's always front of mind. It's always something that we're talking about and thinking about so that it doesn't need to be that if they're not in the room, that thing isn't happening. And so that's one of the big differences and one of the things that we see. But to your point about Role Mapper, clarity in our language, consistency in our job descriptions, being really deliberate about the way that we interview and where we go out and source folks. And then you mentioned our emerging talent as well. That's an incredible program and incredible kind of body of work that's led by a woman by the name of Aaliyah Torrance. And she and her team are always looking at interns and co-ops and universities and getting out and bringing people in. But the part of the big thing is to make sure that we're not only bringing in talent and underrepresented talent at the lower levels of our organization. That's incredibly valuable because it fills our pipeline and it gets people moving. But we've seen so many organizations that have a bit of that kind of pyramid effect, right? Where you have a lot of diversity at the lower levels of your organization, and then it gets more and more homogeneous the higher you go. We are incredibly fortunate that we see, our talent acquisition team bringing in vice presidents from underrepresented communities, incredibly talented folks, are bringing in senior directors and managers, but also growing people throughout the organization. So it's not an either or, it really is an and. And when you're able to marry those things together, we've seen the intense benefits from it because it doesn't feel performative or feel like something we're doing because we have to do it. It is much more about how do we make sure that we're bringing in talented folks that can help us see things differently and who are incredibly aligned around our values and our value system, but incredibly disruptive about the way that we get things done.
These are really good questions. And no wonder that women hold over 20% of all your leadership positions. So what is your forecast for the next 3 years, let's say?
In terms of what we'll be working on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, some of it, so we are, again, very fortunate that we measure a couple of different things. So we look at inclusion. So we have, as a part of our Pulse survey, that we look at our inclusion scores. And we partner with an organization named Culture IQ. They kind of run a bunch of our data, and they're able to benchmark us against, hundreds and hundreds of other organizations. So our inclusion scores tend to be really high and tend to be high across the vast majority of kind of our geographies and demographics and distributions and age ranges and all of that. So that's really positive. So part of it is absolutely about maintaining that. Our engagement scores, so this notion of, do I feel like Akamai has a future? Do I feel like I'm excited about our future? Would I recommend Akamai to a friend or family member to work here? Also similarly incredibly high. And we actually, published a bunch of those results in that Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement annual report that you were mentioning before. So another place where, our main goal is to maintain that, to make sure that as we go through all of the disruptions that we anticipate in 2023 and beyond, that people continue to say, absolutely, I see an incredible future here. Absolutely, I want to be a part of that. And I want to invite others to be a part of that as well. The place that we're going to continue to make progress is in our representation. So what you just described in terms of okay, if we look at, leadership roles, 20 to 25% of those are filled with women. It's not enough. Just frankly, it's not enough, right? When we look at the technical roles in our organization, similarly around kind of mid to high 20% in terms of female representation. Not enough. And so we measure those, we look at those, we're putting plans in place around those. And yet part of what we recognize, and as I attend other conferences and talk to academics in this space, moving those numbers is one of the most challenging things to do because we're not turning over talent all that often. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and the benefit is we hold on to a lot of really talented people. And so it can be easier to say, well, if we're turning over 90% of our employee population, well, wow, we'll have incredible opportunities to bring more people in. But when you've got really talented leaders that say, I actually really like it here, I'm going to stay here for a while, you're not going to replace them with anybody. And so it becomes more difficult to move some of those demographics. So what we're doing is partnering again with our incredible talent acquisition team, with our global talent development team, to be sure that we are attracting, hiring, developing, and promoting talented people regardless of background, and that we are removing and identifying bias anywhere in the process, as unintentional as it may be, to say, well, when we're looking at promotion criteria, have we been really specific to be sure that we're not, unintentionally hampering people that go into the office, or people that work remotely, or people that work in a particular country, or people that don't speak English as their first language because they speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages. And so, those are the places that we're going to continue to focus. But, one of the challenges I know that can come up at times is for people that are frustrated with this work, it can be like, well, when are we going to get there, right? When are we going to be done? And I think that's both for people that care very deeply about the conversation around diversity and inclusion, and ones that are just frankly tired of having it, right? They want to know, when are we done? When can we just move on to the next thing? And from my own perspective, I don't think there's ever a moment that you're done, right? The external environment is constantly changing and adjusting. We learn more about ourselves. We learn more about others. Our world becomes more multicultural. We advance our conversations and start thinking about different forms of diversity and different forms of disability and different forms of, refugee. Like all of these different things are coming together. And so the best thing that we can do is build language and capability and really kind of shared understanding around what it is we're trying to accomplish. But to me, the work is never done. The same as, we would never say our business strategy is done. Everybody put your pencils down and, we're good, right? Because others are changing and adjusting and adapting. The external environment, the macro environment, all of these things are continuing to move, which means we need to be a living organism and we need to respond and react and adapt and evolve to the environment around us. And, we know that the most adaptable, species are the ones that tend to survive. And so that's really a capability that we want to continue to build in. And we know that diverse and inclusive teams are better at non-traditional, unconventional, unpredictable events. And so we're able to see more of those things coming because we are looking at it from a variety of perspectives.
Yeah, that's really well said. And from what you outlined, like it sounds like change is the only constant, the only thing you can be sure about is change, and the work will never stop. That's so
absolutely
true.
Well, and listen, you and I both know, that's our worlds as well, right? And so there's never a moment that things are staying absolutely static, whether we're changing or others are changing, or life events or news events. Like there's always something going on, and in a lot of instances we like change that we have initiated, right? And so if I decide I'm moving, it's a wonderful thing. But we also work in a world where sometimes others are deciding that something needs to change. And so I think your point is spot on. The more that we can recognize that change is not a bad word, it's not a bad thing, and the more that we can become resilient. And again, wonderful partners on the wellness side of our business as well. So we partner really closely with Julie Paris and Amy Claffey and their groups around wellness, because that resiliency is built up not only at work, right? It's about how much are you sleeping? How much are you hydrating? Are you staying healthy? Are you taking advantage of mental health resources and financial literacy resources and all of these other things that go into making sure that when I come to work to get work done, that I can be in a really great place to do that. And so, there will be, I think, a bit of tension. I don't mean that in a bad way, with organizations that say we care about the whole you, because if you are sleep deprived and hungry and over caffeinated and having troubles at home, then you are way more likely to lash out in a meeting when something happens or to react poorly to the change that we're trying to initiate. We can do all we want at work, but if the other 85-90% of your world is crumbling, it's not going to work out well. And so while we never want to impose ourselves on those other parts of someone's world, it is fundamentally different for me when Anthony asks, Khalil, how are your children doing? Khalil, how's your wife? Khalil, Khalil, I know you had this thing going on, or just what do you want to talk about, and leaving that open. And so making the resources available and opening the door and really inviting people to come in, I think will continue to be important for the exact reason you mentioned, which is change is our only constant. And we've got to get good at not just dealing with it or coping with it, but really embracing it and thriving through it.
Yeah. I think that it's often that people expect the people to come as like robots or machines, but we have all this, our lives behind, and just simple question like how really are you, It can change everything. And at least sometimes, sharing about some challenges that you're going through already feels better than just carrying them and bringing them to work, whether in person or online. So that's important to have these days and to have, practices around that where people could, get better, become better, and, even share with their colleagues about their challenges whenever that feels right. And here I want to talk a little bit about, a question that I, often receive is how to set up your ERG, employee resource groups. So what is your, how do you do that at Akamai? And how do you grow your ERGs? Because I know that you have, which is a very impressive number, 11 ERGs representing 1,800 employees. So you definitely know what to share about it for everyone who is listening, maybe thinking about starting, or what is often hard. What I'm observing, that sometimes a company has an ERG and they do something for Women's Day, for example, or Diversity Month, and that's it. So here's the struggle that sometimes they don't know what else they can do. They don't know how they can engage their people. So what is your advice on that? How to get started and how to create a continuous engagement?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I know it's one that, so many folks are dealing with and struggling with in a lot of instances. And, I will be the first to say we do not have it all nailed down. We've got a whole kind of part of our team that is continuing to think about it and invest in it. I'll tell you a little bit of the way that we've approached it and why I think that that's been beneficial. But I think to your point, starting it and continuing it, so much of this is do the things that that you can consistently do throughout your organization. And so I'll draw an analogy to kind of exercise, right? There's one part of looking and saying, hey, you're really fit. How do you do that? And someone may tell you, I go to the gym an hour a day. This is what I eat. This is what I do. And you may say, there's no way that I can do that. And just decide I'm not going to do anything. But it's so much better to say, you know what? I'm willing to go for a walk half an hour a day. And I can do that consistently, and that will be the thing that I invest in. And so to do that constantly versus to say, well, that person over there only eats, boiled chicken and broccoli. So I'm going to try that for a week and then say, never mind, I don't want anything to do with this. So I think it's so important because the ERGs are our commitment to our employees, right? Employee resource groups. And so when we start those and then stop them or invest in them and then stop investing in them, it does send a message to employees that, oh, you cared about this for a while, or you cared about this when it was in vogue, and now you don't anymore. And now that no one is watching or nobody is forcing you to do it. And so I give a lot of credit to Anthony and team, the way that they structured the employee resource groups. I've seen it in other organizations where the employee resource groups are led by the diversity, equity, and inclusion team, or for us, the IDE team. And what we've done instead is every year, every one of the employee resource groups gets a budget right out of the gate. There's no negotiation. There's no kind of, putting together a business case for it. We know they're going to do good things with it. And so that initial investment, I think, reinforces that we want you to do good things with this. This is, this money is there for you to do good work, not for you to have to try and build it and convey it. And it's a thing that maybe we'll invest in, maybe we won't. So knowing that is one part of the investment. The other is the leadership roles are led by the employee resource groups. And so my team is there to support, but those leaders elect their own leaders. They select their own kind of, priorities. They think about the speakers that they want to bring in. And we're really there to elevate and accelerate and amplify that. Each of the ERGs also has an executive sponsor. So a senior leader in the business that is at the vice president or above level that is providing guidance and feedback and visibility and coaching and development and strategic guidance. So that's really beneficial. And I meet with each of the kind of chairs and co-chairs of the ERGs monthly. So that's probably one of the biggest investments that I make in a particular group at Akamai, because I know that they are my eyes and ears into that particular demographic. I also know that my investment in them is an investment in that entire group. And so they wind up being the ones that say, our women's forum determines what will we do for Women's History Month. Our Ohana, which means family, that is around our Black and Hispanic and Latinx population, it determines what we will do for Black History Month, for Hispanic History Month, for any of the recognitions that come up. And what we've been very deliberate about in the way that we've organized those is to say, we as an inclusion, diversity, and engagement group don't determine which of these that we celebrate, right? We are very much focused on building systems and priorities and principles and policies to drive a better employee experience. And we have partnered with our employee resource groups to figure out, Do you want to celebrate Diwali or not? Do you want to celebrate Kwanzaa or not? Those are things that you can opt into. And it removes some of the, well, Khalil, why did you send out an email for Diwali but not for Kwanzaa? Why did you celebrate this month but not this one? And so by putting that back on the employees and them really being the ones that say, these are the things that we feel are important. We have our budget, we have our plan, we have the support and resources. We know that Khalil and his team will show up and celebrate with us, but those celebrations are really driven by employees. It creates a bit of that separation so that employees know, well, Khalil and his team are really focused on making sure we can all get promoted equitably, making sure that we can all, make employee referrals and know that our employees will be well treated when they go through the process. And so for me, that has also been a big game changer. So I think to your point, it's absolutely about the investment, right? How do you get clear on what you can consistently do? And for us, it was, budgeting in advance, having, the leadership teams that are clearly articulated and meeting with them and continuing to partner with them, and then creating this clarity between the work that my team does, the work that our ERGs do, and the work on which we collaborate. And that's been incredibly valuable. And in terms of things like standing them up, quite honestly, again, that goes back to this notion of change. We've been an organization that over the past about 2.5 to 3 years have really embraced the idea of a growth mindset, right? This notion that, the learning is a part of the process and we're not meant to be perfect. And, if we try hard at things, we can get better. And so, introducing a new employee resource group and then saying, okay, we know there's a demographic. We know people want to do this. Where do we go from here? What do we want to do? Where do people want to go? And similarly, recognizing that there may be places, and we've started to have some of these conversations where folks may say, you know what? I don't think we need an employee resource group for this particular group anymore. Like, we feel incredibly integrated into everything that we do. We feel like our voices are heard in everything that we've got going on. You know what, we're just going to create a WebEx Teams chat so that we can talk about recipes and things that may be still a little bit, unique to our group or to our kind of culture. But we don't feel like we need a budget or particular speakers and things like that. And whether folks do want an employee resource group or decide that the time is right to retire it, we don't view either of those as a success or as a failure. And all of this comes under one of our core values, which is referred to as One Akamai, which is this notion that we're all in it together. And so it goes right back to what you and I were talking about when I was talking about my time at Apple, which is how can we be global and local? So how do we respect and honor our women's forum and our veterans ERG and our in-reach ERG that is focused around our disabled Akamai employees, either visible or invisible disabilities, but recognize that at the end of the day, we are all Akamai employees, and our goal is that everyone here is able to thrive and be productive in the environment that we've created.
That's really beautiful. I really like the way you, give people at your ERG a chance to lead without interfering, rather supporting and listening to them. So at the same time, you don't really, take over, but also give them the lead, because I think you can see the beautiful results out of that and the way they would be able to impact, and the way that you said, like, they take the lead and they decide what they want to do. I think this is great. And the budget thing, I think that many of those ERGs really struggle with that, to get the budget. So my question here is, what if someone, let's say, says that at their company, they don't have enough women in technology and they would want to start a company, whether it's women in tech, ERG, or women ERG? Who do they go to? How to find an executive sponsor? So this kind of things. How do you take it off the ground?
Yeah. So in part, if you have someone that has a role like mine, call them, email them.
I just thought about that.
Like, if you've got a diversity and inclusion VP or a chief diversity officer or a head of diversity and inclusion, these are the things that they are thinking about all day, every day. I promise you, when I'm reading the news, I'm viewing it through a lens of diversity and inclusion and engagement and fairness and justice. So these folks want to partner. I think the other thing that's really important, Anna, is so few folks say, I have a concern, and I want to participate, right? So often the folks in these roles hear there's a problem, what are you going to do to fix it? But if there's, hey, I recognize this opportunity, I want to participate, I know you've got a lot of things on your calendar, what support can you give me? Where should we get started? How often can we meet? How can we collaborate? It just lowers the temperature and makes it so much easier and so much more approachable to be able to have that. But similarly, even if you don't have a head of diversity and inclusion or a chief diversity officer, you know who are your go-to people in the company, right? There are probably a couple people that you've either had a similar type of conversation with that has not been about venting, but rather about identifying an opportunity. There's been a leader in the business that has said, hey, I feel like we need to get more women in this part of the business. And they may not be an expert, and that's okay because there's so much data out there. There's the McKinsey Women in the Workplace report, there's, Deloitte research, there's all sorts of stuff. And I promise you, anyone who wants to give me a call and say, hey, we don't have a head of diversity, but we're really interested in where do we start? What do we do? We're in this work because we care about it. And so, while most folks are not going to be able to take it on completely, if you say, what are the first 3 things we should be doing? Here are our numbers. Here's the level of investment we can get. Do we need to get buy-in from our senior leaders first? Do we need to put together a plan first? What do we need to do? But first is to build that coalition of people that can help you move this along, because none of us do it by ourselves. I mean, on this call, I've mentioned our talent acquisition team, our wellness team, our global talent development team, my boss, my direct reports. We are a village, and it is every single person inside of the organization that is saying, yeah, I may not fully understand it. I may not totally get what I'm supposed to do. But if you ask me, do I feel like I want a fair organization where people can be rewarded and recognized for the talents that they bring? Almost everyone will answer yes. And then part of that is helping them to recognize, well, hey, guess what? We do have a bias towards people that speak English. So does that seem fair to you? Probably not. We do have a bias towards people that went to this particular school. Does that seem fair to you? We do have a bias. And so the more you start to pull those things apart, the more people recognize, no, actually, I do want it to be fair. Maybe some of these things have unintentionally advantaged me. Maybe some of these have unintentionally disadvantaged me. But the more that we can create that fairness by just pulling some of those things out and identifying the kind of norms and ways of operating, the clearer we can get and the closer we can get to building an optimal environment. But first and foremost, either find that person that's in a role similar to mine, or find kind of your go-to people, start to pull some of that together and start small, right? The goal, to your point, is not to try and break everything all at once, but it's to find those places where you can start to get a foothold. And classic change management, right? Articulate the end state, identify some of the kind of, milestones along the way, bring together the coalition, create that burning platform. They're not new. We just don't always do them consistently.
Yeah, that's right. And let's to wrap things up. You mentioned also Akamai Foundation. And I know that Akamai Foundation is actively working on improving to improve the access to STEM education. So maybe you can share a little bit more on what have you done in the past years, and especially with the focus on girls in STEM, maybe some success stories or some projects in that direction or in the future pipeline.
Yeah, for sure. So the Akamai Foundation was funded with a couple different endowments by our board over the past years. And that has given us the opportunity to donate upwards of $3 million a year. And that's led by our incredible executive director, Cara DiGiacomo. And so what she's constantly doing is looking at where are places that we can provide grants, where are places that we can provide kind of support and guidance, where are places that our employees can volunteer their talents in terms of, being in service of these groups. So whether it's Girls Who Code, whether it's, the Hidden Genius Project, there are actually just recently we put out an article about the various institutions that we partnered with over 2022, the places that we've made those endowments and investments. And it is just an incredible list all over the world because, again, we have, employees everywhere. And so we want to be really kind of tied into the places that we do business. One classic example is, Kara and a number of our other leaders were invited to NASDAQ a little while ago to ring the opening bell and brought along one of the groups that we had partnered with, STEM for Dance. And it's a collection of young women who are finding this intersection of movement through dance and STEM. And so they, were profiled and got, visibility, and we've, supported them financially over time. But Kara has also, worked with them very closely to look at their programming and think about how we can participate. And so there are so many examples of this. I mean, I'm fielding emails even earlier today from members of our team that say, hey, we're getting ready to replace a bunch of these laptops. We want to, wipe the hard drives, pull them out. Where can we donate them? How can we do good with this? And, and that's in our Tel Aviv office in Israel. And they're like, we've got these wonderful local institutions that we could probably partner with. So how do we get it done? And I think that phrasing is incredibly important because it's not, can we do it? It's how do we do it, right? And so as you have people in your organization that are passionate about these, the question becomes, how do we unlock that? How do we partner? Not, is it okay if? And it may be that you start small, right? You may not have a foundation with tens of millions of dollars of an endowment, but it may be that some of our employees want to donate some of their funds. Could we start up a matching funds, campaign? And even if we can't, could we curate a list of places that employees might want to donate funds, right? There's always an element of something that can be done. And we're incredibly fortunate that our board has seen that this is valuable and has, made the investment. But there are a lot of smaller companies, a lot of larger companies that want to do very similar things and can use some of this as a blueprint. So for us, it's not only the finances, but also the investment, the visibility, the, opportunity to partner and to lend talents and support.
Yeah, I love that you said, even, do good with what you have, even if it's just laptops, volunteering your time, start where you are at, depending on, your company and the resources that you have. But it's also good to have, that vision, but it comes from the leadership already, as you said, your board implemented it. So good job on that.
Thank you.
And, I really love our conversation. I especially, enjoyed that you give so many credits to your colleagues, to your teams, their names. I think this is so important, to speak of the people who are not of the room, in the room, to give them a credit and a shout out. So that's really, really incredible. And, to wrap things up, so what is one thing that you love about Akamai culture that you enjoy?
Oh my gosh. It's interesting because so many of us get this question as we're interviewing other people, and it's fascinating to hear that the answer is almost always consistently the people and the technology. It's the people first. We are still founder led. Dr. Tom Layton, our CEO, formerly our chief science officer. We've got history and gravitas, and I think that the people that are doing this work are good people that want to work together, that want to be inclusive, that want to figure it out. And so that element is incredibly powerful. The other part is the technology. So when we think about the scale of what we do, when we think about what we make possible for folks, when we think about the partners and the clients that we're able to work with and the things that they are able to do, on a safe and secure internet, and, having the right cybersecurity tools, and, the organizations that we've acquired over the years that have made us that much better prepared for everything that we're getting ready to do. We've got great people yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and we've got great technology yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so when you marry those two things, it doesn't get much better than that.
So people and technology yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This is Akamai.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this was Khalil Smith from Akamai. Thank you so much, Khalil. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. I really love the way you're passionate about your role, the way you do. And even from the very beginning, before you accepted the offer, you said hey, I'm not going, to change my life and to move out somewhere that because I have my life set up here. I care about my family, my values, my lifestyle. And I think that already by doing that, you brought already so much to Akamai, being your whole self, your true self. So congrats on doing that. And congrats on doing a great job at Akamai. And I learned a lot. And thank you so much for doing this interview with me. Thanks for your time.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you very soon. And thanks to everyone who wound up listening. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anna. Talk to you soon.